Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Human Behavior Podcast. After a brief hiatus filled with some exciting projects, I'm thrilled to jump into a topic that's both timeless and timely, the concept of time itself. In this episode, Greg and I unravel the complexities of how we perceive time and how it shapes our experiences, decisions, and behaviors. Drawing from ancient Greek philosophies, we distinguish between Kronos, or quantitative chronological time, and Kairos, qualitative experiential time, setting the stage for deep exploration of how these concepts play out in our daily lives. During the episode, we discuss things like the emotional influence on time perception, how attention affects our perception of time, how memory and aging has an influence on time, and we give some practical examples on how we can manipulate our perception of time in order to give ourselves the gift of time and distance. So sit back, relax, and get ready to expand your understanding of time, not just as numbers on a clock, but as a profound element that influences every facet of human behavior. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to check out our Patreon channel for additional content and subscriber-only episodes. If you enjoy the podcast, please consider leaving us a review and, more importantly, sharing it with a friend. Thank you for your time, and remember, training changes behavior. All right, and we're recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Human Behavior Podcast. We had a bit of a break over the last couple of weeks just because we had a very busy schedule, and so we're jumping back into things. It just several projects all decided to coalesce at one time, so we thankfully
it's a good problem to have, Ryan.
It's a good problem to have, but it's thankfully we can bend the laws of physics and be in two places at once. But three is completely out of the equation. So speaking of that, today's topic, which we haven't kind of specifically hit in a podcast before, we talk about it, in general in a lot of them, but is time. And time and our perception of time and how that really shapes our time is shaped by how we experience things and language and memory and all kinds of things. And it's not as clear as we often think it is. And so there's a bunch of stuff I want to get into today, but I'll start it off, Greg, kind of like how we talk about this in class sometimes. And, I don't want to turn into the Matthew McConaughey, time is a flat circle, whatever he says in that show. But, I always started off by talking about throwing it back to the Greeks, and they had, two concepts of time, and they had Kronos and Kairos. And so Kronos was, what we think of as time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes an hour, 24 hours in a day, very, accurate way to measure time, right? But then they also had Kairos. And so Kairos was different. Kairos was kind of your experience of time. And that's so when we've heard those sayings, man, time flew by, or man, time was really dragging on. That's sort of like a qualitative measurement of time, where, Kronos is the sort of quantitative measurement of time. And we get into this because obviously we talk about the gift of time and distance and what that means and how those interplay with one another. But time really, really is a very subjective experience that has to do with that's influenced, our perception of time is influenced by a number of factors that we're going to talk about today. And we have a little bit more control over time than a lot of people think that we do, or at least that's my opinion. Meaning we sometimes jam on the skinny pedal on the right rather than pressing on that big one there on the left, and sort of needlessly speed up time. And that's for a number of different cognitive factors involved with that, and it happens mostly unconsciously. But I want to get into a whole bunch of different topics here and kind of start about this sort of construct of time, Greg. So
all right.
I got a bunch of different things I want to bring up, but I want to throw to you first to comment on my time as a flat circle reference.
No, I think that's great. The one impression that you do better than anything is Matthew McConaughey. And if that's only with your abs alone after he did the Dallas Buyers
all right.
So,
why do you got to reference that movie?
You know why I got to reference that movie. You could have been an extra. So the idea here that I'd like to just posit is that the reason that we had such success with our scenarios with ASAT and Combat Hunter, The reason that we tried to start a revolution, and we're going to keep going with that, fanning the flames for AI and VR, is that they're situations where we can control time. And that is so important to build a memory and emotion link and the repeat performance over time. And we'll talk about that as we go along. But to start, look, time isn't what we think it is. So if you're at ground zero, time is giving us a direction to our memories and our thoughts and our experiences. What does that mean? That means, let's think of a GPS. A GPS is less accurate in Boulder, Colorado than it is in Maine, because you're 5,280 feet above sea level. So they have to adjust time in Boulder. And then all of a sudden, when we get even higher, let's say a satellite that's orbiting the Earth, that's different than if we were on the face of the moon. That's different. And then if we anticipated being in Mars or outside of our solar system, time changes. Gravity messes with time. Different external factors mess with time. And so we're consistently thinking that time is one of those elements that we can always count on. We have this many nanoseconds and this many seconds and this many minutes. And that screws with us. So that human construct to help us identify in what order things happen and to normalize our predictions of the sun coming up and going down and when it's harvest season and everything else, those were set to reduce our anxiety. But because we now rely on them too heavily, we forget that you can slow down time. You can move and influence time. And even if it's an illusion, time is an illusion. So that's okay. So that sounded like your Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is the red and blues on a police car make us dumber. The red color of a fire truck make us dumber. Rushing to the sound of gunfire can get us killed because we don't completely understand our relationship with time. And do we influence time, or does time influence us?
Yeah, and I would say that on your last point there, it's sort of both, right? We influence time, and time influences us. So let's sort of get into some of the factors that really play into our perception of time, because like you even brought up what we call memory emotion links, and emotion is a huge one.
Yep.
So emotion and time, when you're happy, excited, everything's going well, right? That time flies by. When you're bored, it just drags on. And then especially high stress situations, I'm sure people of some people listening have experienced that, where it's like time slows down.
Right.
And so let's kind of define what we mean by this, because you said, you brought up a number of great points that we can kind of define within this example. So, right, we're all having a good time. Time flies by, because it's a lot of emotions going, but it's positive emotions. And, it gives this perception as, it's just flying right by. But then I would say the opposite end of that spectrum is those, when your limbic system is basically taken over, you're in some sort of survival situation or something that your brain perceives as a survival situation. You get this idea that like time slows down. And then I'm sure other people have heard of where you get visual narrowing, tunnel vision, that kind of stuff. And so it has this effect as if time slows down. And what it really comes down to is it's about attention and what you're attending to. And you're actually now basically using 100% of your brain and power, in that situation. Right. So it gives you this effect as if things have slowed down, when in fact, it gets rid of all the outside crap that you don't need. That's why you get that tunnel vision and auditory exclusion. It says, don't worry about any of that stuff. This thing right here in front of you is the scariest thing on the face of the planet. Yep. And I'm actually, this is the first time you get to use all of me. This is like your brain talking to you, right? And that point,
exactly.
And so it gives this perception as if time slows down. Does that kind of make sense in the way I'm sort of describing it?
Yeah, but you're on the cusp of something that's great because you explained it, but some people listening won't completely understand what you're saying. So the idea that the brain perceives a situation as a survival situation. One, your brain is constantly measuring everything around you in survival mode. Your brain has only one mode. Your brain's mode is it's me against everybody else, me against the world, me against everything. And so that anxiety fluctuation, fight or flight, that's always the first thing that you're thinking about. How is this going to impact me? How is this going to hurt me, affect me from breathing, eating, whatever else it is? So what's happened is the longer we've stayed alive, the less attuned we are to that, but it's always the first response of humans. Why is that important? Because that means that your anxiety level stretches or compacts time in a manner which is best for your understanding for future events. So it assumes you're going to survive this event, and it's saying, what can I learn in progress for future events? And you said something that was really great that I don't think everybody understands either. And look, we're nobody, we're nothing. We just know one thing, and that's human behavior. But I'll tell you this, when you're talking about now I'm finally using 100% of my brain, there's so many studies and pundits and talk out there about we're only using so-and-so percent. No, you're not. If you're awake and alive and aware, you're using 100% of your brain.
Yeah.
And that's your available brain right now.
Yeah.
Right? So that may change in a month or in a year or in 1,000 years. But right now, you're functioning just as highly as you can.
Yeah.
You're not going to all of a sudden have some gosh damn epiphany at the last moment. You get what I'm saying? That's not driven by, chemicals like your adrenal cortex or endorphins or something that are going to make you superhuman for the second. I get it. But that's not going to expand your capacity for decision making, let's say, right? So once you understand those two things, that the brain's always perceiving it as a survival situation, and you only have 100% and you're using it, that's why time slows down. The perception of time slows down in that moment, and all of a sudden you get auditory exclusion because you don't need it right now. You're in a fight for your life, and you know what? Those things have to take a standby, and everything is going in slow motion. No, it's going at regular speed. It's just all of a sudden, all of those sensory perceptions are so important to your brain that it's saying, okay, let's put Tommy over here, and I want to see the muzzle flash there, and now the car is pulling up. And it's almost as if you're in control of the fast forward and the slow on your TV. And I understand for the scientists in the room, that's not an exact representation, but it's a depiction that's close enough for all humans to understand it so we can accept it. Brian, to give you an example, Rachel Ray does these cooking shows. You know me, I'm a cooking show guy. And she always says, okay, I'm going to make all of the meals for a week on Sunday, and therefore I'm going to save time. So when I come home, well, you're not saving time, you're moving time. You're adjusting time to suit you.
But that has to do with the quantity versus time, right? Like
exactly.
it takes just the amount of time to make 4 pounds of meatloaf than it does 2 pounds of meatloaf or something.
But
I get what you're saying.
That proves that there's a mathematical quality, and that also reinforces space time. Okay, you have time, and then when you add the 3 dimensions of space, then what you have is now a 4-dimensional continuum, and that can be manipulated. You could, for example, you said time speeds up when you're having fun. I would throw the corollary: a watch pot never boils. That means that when time is laboriously slow, and we all knew about it because some Greek guy carved that into a gosh damn Parthenon pillar. And the idea is those things are real because the perception is real to us. So therefore, the actual time never changes. Time keeps plodding along. But where we come into it, the angle that we approach it from, that's a classic argument. We have been conditioned to think that time is an arrow. It starts at the left and it goes to the right, and it's a continuum. And then, my joke is always a tightrope walker. There's only 2 ways. He's going forward or he's going back. What happens is time is irrelevant to what our social construct is because it'll continue in perpetuity even if we don't. So that's why we have to really, really attend to it. And when you say attention, that's a key function of understanding how time relates to you in the moment.
Yeah, and so let's get into that because attention is extremely powerful. Even with your example there of that high stress situation, where it feels like time slowed down. It's like no, or even to the myth that when I don't know where that came from, or someone does that. You only use 10% of your brain. No, your brain.
Oh my
you
God,
use 100% of your brain. I don't know why. I don't know where that came from. I got to look that up actually, but. It is, no, you don't. It just, it comes down to is you can only attend to so much at a given time. So what it is, and this is why they have, like, everyone talks about the flow state and all this different stuff. And all it is paying attention. Like, yes, I agree. You are so distracted that you have to train yourself to get better at attending to things in your environment. That's absolutely true. Yep. Because there's so much coming at us in the way our phones and technology is, right? So the idea is that attention is a very integral part to our perception of time. So it has to be what we attend to, which is also why when things are boring and, it's moving slow. There's not a lot of brain activity going on, right? And so, and it's the opposite, obviously, with the examples we gave. But attention is extremely powerful because that explains too, what you were talking about, the perception of time slowing down, those high stress incidents, because it just tunes everything else out. Said, here's the one thing you need to focus on right now. And then it does feel like that. And, to make sure we don't get too sort of abstract with the conversation.
Yep.
One of the important things to understand is, you gave the idea of, okay, time starts on the left, it goes right, or we have this single line. And I get it out, in the furthest areas of the galaxy or really, really small, elements, that changes a little bit, but, it really is important that we understand that time influences us and we influence time, and you can
Absolutely.
slow time down in a sense. You look at different, even like cultural differences, bigger city where people are moving around, moving fast, versus you go down to the South and people talk a little bit slower and things go a little bit slower in a small town like that. That's what we're talking about. It's still the same timeline, but because of the amount of information we're taking in, maybe more versus less, or the feeling of being busy or something,
Yep.
it adds to it. And so this is always interesting to me because I think it's very hard for us as humans to grasp this concept, because we're like, no, I have an 8-hour shift, or no, I have this to do. I got to go pick up the kids at 3. It's like, yeah, but 3 could be in, a little bit, or that can be a long time from now, depending on what you're doing. And
Yep.
when you kind of can try to take that perspective, it helps you influence how you perceive time. And I think therefore how you use time. A big thing people talk about is like, hey, you got to have really good time management. And I look at it as like, no, I like having good like personal management. Like I know me and what works for me versus the time. The time
Right.
can stretch and be an accordion, but it's how I operate within that space time. Does that kind of make sense?
No. Let me give you an example of exactly that. So that I had to. This is ancient history, but that I had to drive with Sean and then with my brother Jeff out to Colorado a number of times before Shelley and I made the move to Colorado, because I had to get my Michigan Law Enforcement Officer Training Council certification in Colorado to continue my law enforcement stuff. So Shelley and I were making a series of 23-hour trips back and forth to get that done. And I remember pulling into, I think it was Eagle, Colorado, to a city market, which is, just a convenience store, to grab some waters for the hotel room and, a couple of minor things. I had them in my cart and I'm in line, and there's only 2 people in line. That's why I chose the line. And the lady in front of me and the guy that was doing the checkouts were droning on about everything. Oh, and it's going to be a fast spring. I'll tell you what. One thing that I know, and we have that. Well, when you're peeling back the frog on that horse's hoof, and I'm sitting there tapping my foot, and finally I go, hey, come the F on. What's going on here? And they're like, oh, wait, your timing is all wrong on this. You got that big city mentality. Then looking back on that incident after having lived in Colorado, and I'm the guy. I'm the old man on the porch with the rocker and the lemonade. You know what I'm saying? Because what's happened is that culture influences your perception of time, just like cognitive attention or fear or any of the other things that do it. And what happens is you are either in on that, okay, you allow that, and you go with that flow. There's your flow state. Or what happens is you buck that trend and you fight against it. See, that goes directly to cop work. And I'll give you an example of that. When you show up on the scene and the guy's shooting, he has an agenda and his timeline is different than yours. And that's the key. So let me go backwards in time. Funny.
Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. Which you can, by the way. But look, what is the function of sleep? The function of sleep is to allow your brain time to rest. Okay, because it does so much. How many calories per pound does your brain expend compared to the rest of your body? So we know the brain is a hugely important mechanism for more than just trivial things like blinking and swallowing and breathing. Or we wouldn't have different regions of the brain that controlled that, right? So the brain is so hugely important. And time is one of those things that humans build to show us the order of things. And that makes life less anxious and scary. And so when we can slow time down and understand the days and the seasons and the hours, like Brian, you and I are going to meet. Well, we can't just name a time. We have to name a time and a place. That's something my brain can grasp and pick up and turn around. And that goes to organization. So all of those things are absent when we come sliding up to a scene and the person's lost his flow of time because they're doing insane or seemingly crazy things right in front of you, and you're rushing into that. Look, if we rush to a scene just to give us more time for critical thinking, that would make sense. And then somebody right now is saying, well, you don't have the time. You got to shoot or fight or you do. Well, wait a minute. If you're trading your life for those at the scene and it's not wartime, something's wrong. You're moving too fast. Of course, in wartime, even experts are going to die. Why? Because they're dropping bombs and they've got, all these other external arousal things, mines and snipers that are trying to kill you. But that's not so in first responders, in firemen, in cops, in school shootings. You see what I'm saying? Those things are less obtuse. They're less prone to us missing cues because we can slow time down. And slowing time down is a function of not moving slowly through your environment, but saying, wait a minute, before I cross this threshold, time left to right with the arrow, I must make certain things sure. I have to make these things certain. Do I have cover? Do I have support? Am I wearing the appropriate armor? Is there more than one opponent? Do you see what I'm saying? And those are things that we're naturally geared to make. Those are decisions that our brain is already ready for.
This is where I get what you're saying, but I would disagree that we naturally make those things because we're so emotionally based and emotionally responsive and everything is filtered through our limbic system in a sense.
Yeah.
We don't react unless something is emergent, and therefore we overreact or we speed up time needlessly, right? Because meaning like
I'm agreeing with that.
So because you brought up some good examples, like right, like all right, having our timelines are different. Everyone knows, like from especially like training folks or operating in the Middle East or different cultures like that. It's like, oh yeah, they have inshallah time. It's like, well, if Allah wills it, that's when I'll be there. And I would literally be like, no, pre-combat checks go at 2300 and it'd be inshallah. I'd be like, no inshallah, 2300. It's like,
right.
It's a
but
different
that's time.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I mean. It's no different than exactly what people call doper time, where it's like, wake up at the crack of noon. I have no timeline. I have nowhere to be. So I figure out my day as I go. And I'm basically
I'll meet you in the Burger parking lot at noon. And it's 5:30, right?
They're doing that at bang thinking, right? Just going through their environment. But the reason why I kind of want to, or what I mean by that, I'll sort of clarify when I said I don't agree, is that we typically wait till things are obvious and apparent and a problem, and then we feel that we need to react. Even though, I get what you're saying, that intuitively our brain is trying to predict everything, and it doesn't want to be surprised. And because we don't know maybe how to perceive things correctly sometimes, or how to analyze things sometimes, that we aren't tuned in or we're not primed for the right type of recognition in those areas. And so like you're saying, like, you're going, okay, our thing is, oh crap, drop everything, let's go. I mean, that's consistent throughout so many different factors or so many different things. We're not really primed to sit back and go, all right, well, let's conduct some predictive analysis here. Cause you keep because you keep talking about, you can slow time down. And so I want you to explain what you mean by that. But I would almost push back at saying it's a little bit counterintuitive to how humans typically operate. If that makes sense.
And I would say this. I would say your misgivings are well-founded, but they're in the sense wrong, because you're forgetting the cardinal rule, not you, meaning humans. Do we influence time, or time influences us? If we're walking down a trail and a mountain lion steps out in the middle of the trail, or a bear, something that's vicious that could eat us, our natural instinct is to freeze, bend up, back up slowly, and raise our arms up to try to look like we're bigger than the animal. That's spinal tuned. That isn't something that we were taught by our parents and our grandparents because they survived a bear or a mountain lion attack. So what happens is to even the score, God, Buddha, Vishnu, Allah gives us certain file folders that are partially filled in, hardwired. And one of those things is that we have to eat and we have to breathe. And the other one is that when we're facing danger, okay, get loud, get big, okay, scream, and then we get the fight. Okay, well, I'm going to fight. I'm not going to fight a bear unless the bear grabs onto my leg, right? And then those decisions are already predisposed. They're already in our brain. Now, if we don't choose them, the great thing about it is the bear kills us or the mountain lion drags us into the cave and eats us, and then we don't have to worry about adversely influence the rest of society. Survivors influence society. And that's where we learn those lessons from. And they're hard lessons to learn. But the great thing is we've had hundreds of thousands to millions or billions of years of evolution to help us.
So you're sort of saying that instinctual freeze, right, is sort of our biology giving us the gift of time and distance.
That's exactly what it is. So, and let me fight that argument a little bit further, Brian. Okay, so weapons, and a lot of people that are listening to this would understand the fundamentals of weapons. So what is a pistol designed for? A pistol is designed to get you to your shotgun. What's a shotgun designed for? It's designed to get you to your rifle, and a rifle is designed to get you to your sniper rifle, to the artillery, and moving back further and further. Why are we moving back? Because up close and personal, in that interpersonal distance, anything can happen. It's a crapshoot. Even an untrained opponent can stab you or kill you. So why then, if we have a pistol and the training is at 25-meter targets and we make ourselves sure that we can hit them with multiple rounds, why then are most of the shootings at 7 yards or less multiple rounds and they're not fatal? You get what I'm trying to say? And that's a function of us fighting our hardwiring. Our hardwiring is saying, give yourself time and distance, take that cover. Wait a minute, are you seeing this incident correctly? But our push past that, our rush to get in there, our emotional selves are the ones that are integral in our undoing. And that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not disagreeing with you, and I see the way that you would think that you could disagree with me. But if you understand the fundamental underpinnings of all humans are identical, right, that we have those warning systems, the people without the warning systems are the most vulnerable in our society, and they're the ones that are predated upon most.
So would then, and this is kind of like just because it popped in my head when you're talking, but would then almost would denial in a sense be sort of the gift of time and distance, like in some manner?
Denial is the other side of the same coin that you brought up, because denial makes sure that we don't expend calories, because back when we were formed, we couldn't. Back when we were formed, there was an environment that was equally as dangerous to us, and finding food was hard, shelter was hard, building a fire was hard. So you didn't want to go out there half-cocked and expend a bunch of calories on something that wasn't a danger. So denial was, hey, are we absolutely sure? Now what's happened? Technological advances, the surety of food and shelter have made us dumber over time. So now denial is exactly the opposite way we actually slow down. Our brain is trying to learn, and we don't understand that primitive kick in the ass was designed for a good thing. And now it's become a bad thing. Now it's inaction when we should be acting, right? So that is, again, a look at time. Time is flexible. Time moves. And so once we understand that, the perception of the person at the scene that we're about to shoot or use less than lethal force on is different than ours. They think they have a lot more time. Do you get what I'm trying to say? They're making decisions,
or they're trying to create more time. Yeah,
exactly. So we have to be in tune with our place in time, the distance between us, their place in time, and all of the other external arousal factors. And what do we know? That when those external arousal factors raise, the number is going to certainly become insurmountable at some point. So our best decisions are going to be made before that inverted U, and at better decisions will be made if we're at a greater distance, that we slow time element down. In other words, it's not inevitable. And that we take things like cover. Cover is a gift of time and distance.
Okay, so yeah, I get what you're saying now. Do you? So let's jump into it, because you keep saying like, all right, you can slow time down. Like, well, how do I slow time down? Like, what do you when you say that What do you mean by that? Because you're giving obviously to like some high stress incidents or complex situations, or like you're talking about, a police call where someone's shooting up a place or something like that.
Yep.
So you're in a certain category with that alone. But like I just to keep it broad at first, like
Yep.
what do you mean by like we can slow time down, or I got to give myself the gift of time and distance?
Yeah. So camouflage gives you the gift of time and distance. So cover sense, and now let's just go a different direction. Let's talk about hunting. If I want to hunt something to eat it, and I use the cover scent, skunk scent, or urine to fool the animal that I'm an estrus cycle, so they think I'm a breeding female somewhere that's around there, and camouflage. If I add just those two things, and then add something environmental, like I'm upwind or downwind to something, what happens is that buys me the gift of time and distance. So now when that animal's natural instinct would have been to alert before that and avoid that specific trail, I've fooled the perception. I've increased my perception and decreased yours. And that's acceptable. And so if I am going to give myself the gift of time and distance, let's talk fishing. I use a chartreuse bait because that's known to stand out against the water. And then I make sure that my bait has a pattern that's similar to a fish, and maybe a little rattle, a couple of BBs that are in it that vibrate, that attract the fish. So what I'm doing is I'm fooling the fish's senses to say, hey, this is another fish, to make them avoid seeing the hook. And so now they're hooked and they go, shit, I'm using the gift of time and distance. So history is full of examples, and I could go on in different things. The Trojan horse is a gift of time and distance, right? What I did is I fooled you into allowing me inside of your border by doing a ruse. And so if we use that efficiently, Brian, then what we can do is we can buy time. And again, that's a colloquialism, in an event, and likelihood changes. Likelihood of events changes. And that's a magic. I mean, to know that you can change this from a lethal encounter to less than lethal, that's amazing. To know that something like Heimlich maneuver is a gift of time and distance. Heimlich maneuver is turning a certain death by choking into a possible save by doing a few simple steps. That's fucking magic, Brian. You see where I'm going? I'm saying this is true Harry Potter shit.
Yeah, and there's I understand your examples, because like where you even brought up like deception basically as a form of time and distance, or a form of slowing down time. But it's hard in those moments to do that, right? So obviously, like you said, the closer I am to that bang, in a sense, or that chaotic situation, the less time I do have. And I think because that's objectively true, that actually influences then how we act and perceive in those times, right? And
You're
it's
exactly
like we
right.
talked about.
That's your point about influencing time and time influencing.
And it's like our own. I think our own way of perceiving these things, and this is why I brought up, even the language we use influences time. And the last episode we did about, where we talked about the myth of anything can happen. It's like, well, if you think that way, if you perceive things that anything can happen, then that's chaos for your brain, and it will never. It can't. Right. So you're affecting your cognitive abilities. So you're actually speeding up time when you're doing that, rather than slowing time down. Right? Saying, well, okay, well, what? I don't know what this is, but what isn't it right now? I mean, these are sort of theoretical questions you can sort of ask yourself in the moment, because like you said, we always want to get in and get something done. All right, hey, let's go do this. And sometimes we got to take a step back. So I understand the fact that I can, all right, stop before I go up there, pull up the binos and look. But you brought it back to training, is that we don't really do that stuff a lot. And if I don't put that into these actual thinking points into how I train, those inevitabilities are created. And there was there was one reason someone had showed me, and they're asking about it. It was like a law enforcement traffic stop thing. And it was like, they're like, well, you're talking about time and distance, and look, this guy pulled this guy over, and he came out and, and immediately came right up to him. I was like, okay, stop. and this is, I asked this person, I was like, how many times have you pulled someone over? They're like thousands. I was like, okay, has anyone ever jumped out of their vehicle and started walking back to you? Like, that's the decision point. It's not that you're already so obvious. And what I mean is, like, we don't build in these thinking points into how we approach it and to know what that is. So then, therefore, it's very hard for me to apply it. And obviously, we can say training, but I think this stuff is conceptually even hard to wrap our heads around.
Yeah, and that doesn't, Brian, I'm so in agreement with you, but that doesn't mean it's an excuse. You see what I'm saying? And that's what we're doing. It's we're allowing it to be an excuse, saying, well, it's hard. Kiss my ass, it's hard. So here's the thing. Let's equate it to something quite different. Let's equate it to cheating on your spouse or significant other. Okay, why is that fun? That's not fun because breeding is fun, because you got somebody at home you could breed with. You got your hand you could simulate breeding with. The reason it's fun is because of the novelty. And novelty makes things exciting again. And what happens is now all of a sudden the language, and I'm going to do a card, and let's sneak around, and there's some subterfuge, and man, you're looking at me different than my spouse or significant other does, and that none of that's true. What happens is the routine, that word, okay, of your relationship has lost its peaks and valleys. It's normalized, and that's up to you to fucking fix that. But what happens instead is it's much easier to go across the street and bag Mrs. Howell that lives in the corner apartment, right? Because that's novel and somehow feels new and fresh. If we could wrap our heads around that we've sanded down the peaks and valleys. Okay. Time has done that. You get what I'm trying to say?
And I don't know if Mrs. Howell would go for that. She doesn't seem like that kind of lady, but
she does. A couple of drinks of Mrs. Howell is crazy.
But no, so that was actually, you're talking about novelty versus routine, like, and because and this goes back to why I kind of had said that we're not sort of primed for this, because our brain is constantly trying to make things routine. It's trying to get rid of novelty.
Of course,
it wants to normalize everything. So therefore, that's going to a huge influence. It's a huge factor in influencing my perception of time. Something that's new or novel, well, that's different. Now I have more attention. Now I'm attending to that.
Exactly.
And then where something it's just routine.
That came from survival, Brian. That came from survival, because this is somehow different than all these other file folders I have. I've normalized all of those, and this may be what? Danger or opportunity. And that's exactly true. So your last statements are so powerful and true, they need to be repeated. Look, you normalize things. That doesn't mean it's the way that things should be. That means that that's the way nature makes sure that you don't expend needless calories and only jump when there's a real fright. Our brain doesn't want to do that constantly.
Yeah, and that's obviously a huge factor in this perception, and then how we describe those things and how we articulate them, and that's where the language comes in. But so how am I supposed to do that? How am I, like, meaning, and this is again getting into why we talk about everything starts with, sort of cultivating curiosity, right? And looking, like, if you can prime yourself just to be curious with your environment, there's a world out there. There are many worlds out there that you would be hopefully fascinated by, but that's what we're kind of getting at with the gift of time and distance. Is overall, I would say, is stop making everything the same, and look for novelty in situations. Like because if I look for novelty, it's a generalization. I don't need to. There's no specific thing I need to look for, because it's so contextually based that I can just say, well, this is why, again, for those of you who have been in our training, where we talk about incongruent signals, like, okay, a piece of candy. It's the Peter Griffin. A piece of candy. You know what I mean? If I look for that kind of stuff, that is a way for me to affect my perception of time and therefore create time and distance, right? That's a way that I can influence time versus just time influencing me. So you can change that dynamic and change the influence in any situation. Now, maybe only a little bit in certain ones, right? But it's still a possibility. And that's hard, I think, again, because I go, well, why is this difficult for people to really understand? It's like this double-edged sword of how we're primed biologically, if that makes sense.
That's absolutely the truest thing that everybody needs to understand, is that hardwiring messes with us our entire life because we think we're smarter than the average bear and we're just yogi. We just got the hat and we got the tie on and we're looking for picnic baskets. And when
shout out to the park rangers we did the webinar
exactly.
for.
Yes, thank you guys and ladies. So look, Brian, you talked about incongruence. So what's incongruence? Incongruence is a frequency. It's a musical note. It's the balls at McDonald's in the playground, and they're constantly in motion, and that can be read and it can be felt. And what's the Doppler effect? As we're going fast down that train track, that siren and that whistle becomes less powerful to us because all of a sudden we have to reassess where it's coming from. And what does that mean? That means that the faster we go, the more incongruencies we're going to miss. We're going to miss that turbulence. We're not going to see that turbidity. And that's how we form anomalies. Anomalies don't just pop up unless, like, we joke in class about, hey, if a person's kneeling down, putting a nose cone in an RPG and oriented toward your direction, you don't have to wait for 3 signals, right? But what happens is at the wide end of the funnel, at the biggest end of the funnel, you're searching for novelty. You're searching for nuance. You're looking to be interested in cultivating curiosity. That's going to lead you to, wow, there's not a lot of frequency here, so my baseline isn't very animated. But look at all of this noise over here. That might mean something. As you approach the noise, you go, wow, this is very incongruent because it's not a band playing, it's people yelling. And it's not people yelling for a sporting event, it's people yelling at each other. And do you understand what that's doing now? Now the funnel is narrowing in the time and distance space, which are the 2 outer rings, right? And what we're doing is we're coming towards anomalous behavior. An anomaly is something above or below a baseline that needs to be investigated. Bing! Now we have reasonable suspicion. Now we're there. What we've done is we've slowed time down by managing time, by naming time. Rachel Ray didn't save a gosh damn second. Rachel Ray moved time around so it was more economical for her, which is a math problem. And not all math problems come out the same when we get further and further out into the galaxy, which shows you that you can, even at your atomic level, influence the outcome of the situation by adjusting your perception of time. I know that sounds big, but it's not. It's a very simple construct.
And it is a big concept, though. But I get what you're doing an excellent job of simplifying and explaining what you mean, especially when you're talking about buying time. It's like you can that, because that is a little bit like, that is easier for me to understand, right? It's going, okay, I see. I'm going to do all of this at once right now today, so I don't have to spread it out over the week. So yeah, I technically will save a couple minutes here and there because of economy of scale, meaning I'm not like starting up the vehicle and driving. I don't go like to the grocery store, then come home, and then go to the, whatever other store and then come home. I go to all of them while I'm out because that's there's a little bit of economy of scale there, sort of, in a sense. But I get what you're saying in terms of buying time. And how do I then prime myself in a way? I'm sitting here listening to this podcast, and I got Matthew McConaughey and the Nutty Professor on here talking about their constructs of time. But then how can I like prime myself for this? I know we're giving examples,
so
right?
What is
and you get what I'm saying is like, and we were talking about training, but like I'm listening here, like what do you do knowing what you know, Greg, in the moment where you go, because we've done this before, right? Where we've had conversations about business stuff and you're like, hey, do we have to answer that right now? And it's like, you're right. No, we don't. So let's push that down.
Right. But that's a business thing and it works, right? So let's talk about that in 2 layers. The first layer is an example that my great friend Brian Marin uses when we're on the road that sometimes people miss. Brian points to the thermostat on the wall and says that is such an important idea because that thermostat says 69 degrees. And that 69 degrees is the same in East Timor as it is in Mexico City, as it is in Kansas City. And therefore, that won't change. That scale is constant and consistent. But how I view that, 69 is too cold for me. 69 is too warm for me. That changes how we operate human behavior. So now I put on a jacket. or I take off a jacket, or I put on a summer hat so I don't get sunburned. So that's what you're talking about. That's the street answer. The street answer is so what? And the so what to time is, if I have more time, would I come to a better decision? So where can I economize that time? If I'm racing to the scene to take cover and evaluate the situation. If I'm racing to the scene because a person is fighting for their life and those nanoseconds count, two different standards. So what I have to understand is what I'm measuring it against. So the gift of time and distance on a choking baby, I'm not going to sit down and bring out the gosh damn Funkin' Wagnalls and read up on the gosh damn circulatory system. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's certain things. And so what training is supposed to do with us is training is supposed to expose us to those so we better understand how to manage them personally. So let me go back to something I said 40 minutes ago about our gosh damn scenarios and the revolt we started with Hoberman. The idea that we wanted to bring, and we still want to bring to AI and VR, is the fact that it's unbelievably cheap to redo the scenario over and over and over and get a different outcome. That needs to be in every single scenario that I can go, wait, I want to try that again. Roll tape. We go backwards and we start over. Wait, I want to change what I said. And that changes the outcomes. If we can't do that, then the system is flawed. The second part of that is we proved that a number of ways and a number of studies. And one of the most easy ones that if anybody's ever met us, Brian, when they saw our scenarios, we would do a tactical freeze in the scenario. And we'd ask a certain amount of questions, something you can't do in real life. And then we'd say, okay, at what point can we roll tape back to where an influence, an outside, a word, a statement, a bullet, a question, you get what I'm trying to say, would have changed this likely outcome? And the real answer to that is everywhere. But look, they say, when the guy came up with the bike and he walked off with the bike, that was interesting to me. Go on. And so we roll the tape back and we replay it and we replay it and we replay it. That's training, Brian. Our brain loves that. Our brain needs to find Waldo, but it needs to look first. Because if we don't develop the looking for Waldo, we'll never understand the necessity to find Waldo. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and that's what it is. And you brought up a good point with that, is that meaning when we're talking about, okay, stop, roll tape back, what was that part? Because we can't physically do that in real life. You can mentally, right? You can go back and you can time travel in a sense. But what we're talking about is that, okay, pause. What was it that you saw? Okay, that's interesting. Why was it? Let's go back. Well, okay, knowing that now, and we put that together, what decision would you make now? And that's what your brain loves. That's what it goes, oh, I can change the outcome. Oh, okay, I can do this. I can influence it. It really is. And but that's what life is, except we don't get to look at, there's no picture on the front of the box that we get to compare it to. We're just trying to put the pieces together a seemingly logical manner. And so, yeah, sometimes it doesn't work out. Right. And it's because that's so perception, true. but looking at those incidents, because if you want to do some time traveling, you can, in a sense, do that with your own memories, right? Knowing that
you literally are your own time machine.
Well, time and time is another thing that influences memory so much, because what happens over time, like we start jumbling things together. It doesn't remember small details. It's hey, yeah, I remember when we came to this restaurant a few years ago, and my wife's like, yeah, that wasn't me, buddy. It's like, exactly. Whoops, sorry. But so memory is another a big issue when it comes to time perception, how we do it, but. In what you're talking about in those examples is like, I even try to do that with the insurgent at home.
Yeah, of course.
It's like, okay, what would happen if you did that? Or why did you see that or find that interesting? Well, most most cars I see around here don't have that. Okay, well, knowing that, what could I expect? And it's sort of that what if game, but it's using like actual artifacts and pieces of evidence versus just coming up with shit in our head, right? Yep. It's something in there. So I like how you describe that. And getting people to think that way is tough, because again, it's like we don't fully recognize our ability to influence our time and perception of time, and then therefore act within a space. Now you'll
Yes.
see people who are like maybe like real successful or started a bunch of companies or did this, and they'll kind of write about it, but they write about it in a manner that not like we're talking about it, but they're talking about the same thing. They're going like, well, you got to see it differently, and you have to understand that all of the different influences, meaning they can't even describe what they're doing because it's so sort of implicit and tacit that
I
they've
get
learned.
that.
You know what I mean? Yeah, that it's like, look, like there's like at least like I get the visual of the ball pit at the McDonald's and how that influences because we've all been in a ball pit before. But for a lot of people, when they talk about it, and I see different articles or a book come out about something, and I'm like, yeah, he's talking about space time and how you can influence it. People are like, he's not talking about physics. I was like, well, neither am I. I'm talking about your life right now. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like,
But see, that's the piece that, Brian, the brain, look, again, let me reiterate, you're your own time machine. So you control how things happen and which order they happen in. Ask Carl Walenda if he'd like to have that nanosecond back when he underestimated the situation that he was in, even though he was a top trained athlete, right? People look it up. I'm not going to explain that one any deeper. I will also say that your brain is like a Wonkavator. It goes up ways and down ways and sideways and front ways and back ways. So use that to your advantage, because that alone, being able to cycle more quickly through available file folders and pick one that's closer to the 10 ring is much more important than flipping tires and climbing a rope. Yes, your physical health matters. Yes, your sleep matters. We talked about that with booting the brain and everything else. But Brian, if you don't survive the incident, all of that other stuff is not. So those decisions that you make have to be decisions that are informed by time and by distance. And we have to understand which that we can accelerate and which we can't. And historical perspective is a great teacher, so we don't have to go very far. This epiphany thing that I get, the only social media I have is LinkedIn, and I think some days it makes me dumber. Reading somebody going, hey, you got to read this book. Look, just because you just now had that epiphany that the other ones have known for 100 years or 50 years or something, you get what I'm trying to say? It's like, do me a favor. Do you understand we're all out here working on that same problem every day, and we have been for decades, right? So the idea behind being able to take any situation and turn it into an on-duty roll call example. Like, for example, we go back to watch pot never boils. So I would start off with that, okay? And then we would say, well, let's put 2 pots on 2 different stoves in 2 different rooms, and let's measure the results, okay? And now in one room, we have the pot boiling on its own. In the other room, we have spectators. You get where I'm going with this, right? And then lo and behold, guess what we happened in 3 minutes and 20 seconds later? Both pots are boiling, and guess what? It was identical time on both. So is watch pot never boils true? And then everybody goes, no. But you say, then what makes it true? And you say emotion. What do you mean emotion? Well, memory and emotion link. While I'm sitting there waiting for it, anticipation's a bitch, and that takes more time. But it really doesn't take more time, but the perception of time is equal to my memory of time. And so now what did you just do at on-duty roll call? You didn't, well, first of all, you confused everybody in the room. But the second thing is you go, so what? And the so what on that is that you have more time than you think you do. Because if time is just like that thermostat on a wall and it's 69 degrees, what does that mean to Brian? And what does that mean to my suspect? And what does that mean to the question, hey, can I have a cigarette before you put the handcuffs on me? All of those things are in play. And that's what we don't do, Brian. We don't do training with enough external arousal to make it almost impossible to manage. Training must push us to those cognitive limits where it's almost impossible for us to make the right decision, and then come back and say, at what points were we able to influence this, and how can we use that to our advantage in the next encounter? If we don't have time as an element, as a matter of fact, situational awareness, the best part of that definition is the last part. What does that mean for future
state?
Okay,
yeah.
So that's time and distance too.
Yeah. We covered a lot, and I don't know. There's this this I don't know who said the quote, but it was something like maybe the the only way to fully understand a theory is to derive the conclusion yourself or prove it wrong. And this is one of those things where you really do have to try to derive that conclusion yourself, because you're not going to prove it wrong in this case. I know that. But and going out
denial
and
is trying to prove it wrong. That's your basis for
Okay.
that. And you're specifically right on the right track there, because that's what humans constantly do. Instead of accepting thing as it is, we constantly say, this can't be so.
Yes, and part of that is looking at for things for what they can be and not just what they are. And I mean, you're that goes
can
into
happen, Brian.
Well, there one thing we didn't hit, we hit on a lot. One thing we didn't hit is just kind of in general. I do want to throw in here because it's important, not just throw it in here, but age, and as we age and the perception of time changes. But I think overall, right, meaning, and I use this one in class, like, from you think back to when you're a little kid, from when you're 9 to 10, that those birthdays when you're a kid, or Christmas or something like that, takes forever to come around. It's like, well, between the age of 9 and 10, you just live 10% of your life. So that's a significant part of your life so far. But then, from 49 to 50, you just, it's as time starts speeding up, you just live 2% of your life and you have a ton of life experience. So you're like, what, it's already, it's my birthday again. Jesus, wasn't that just a few months ago? So, but and part of that I think has to do with, obviously, as humans, sort of not knowing that one day we will die, but not knowing when that is, hopefully, but you know what I mean? How age and just how we look at time, because we don't, because look, you're bringing in all this historical perspective and even down to the physics level and how long the Earth has been here in the solar system, the galaxy, but that we cannot comprehend that as humans. Like, we do not understand infinity. We do not understand. You would not understand the difference between a million and a billion. It's not conceptually possible for you to really do that. Like, I can't understand more than about 10 things. Like, once you get about 10 people in the room, that's about it for me. And I get, you know what I mean? It's like,
but that's
there's at least 10.
You have absolutely discovered the key, and it's worthy of note. So let's do two quick things. The number one thing is, the sun and the planets condensed 4.55 billion years ago from a bunch of interstellar
possibly
gas.
Even longer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one that we know, and we can prove that number, and we can say that, the fiery beginning was about 13.8 billion years ago. So that's a lot longer before that, with the vaster level of the cosmos. Why is that important? Because we can't control that. Those are things that are outside of our ken, which means that we don't need to worry about them, and we can opine about them and sit and smoke opium in a rocking chair and talk about them, but it's not going to influence
or cigars. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, did I go too far? Is that the line now? So let's tie that into what you just said about age and time perception. Look, things are less novel. They're more routine, even just with the passage of time.
True.
Our teeth are worn down more.
Yep.
Our muscles are worn down. Our hair, the skin. So what does that mean? That means that time perception changes over time, because we're not that same person that we were. And now all of a sudden we've got an immense array of file folders that could come up in a different situation. And therefore, seen it before, not shocking me now. And that's what the goal was supposed to be of training. Training was supposed to be that drop on your tongue that gave you that experience, gave you that novelty early on, so you could work with it. Now what happens is, most of the great shit that we know is when we're in our late 60s, early 70s, and we go, no, we can't do anything with it, And then we get angry about it, and that brings up your death potential, right? And now the impact of fear or boredom or being without my kids starts to influence my perception of time. I'm here all alone. Time is lasting forever. I wish I would just blank, right? So what has to happen again is, because we sand down those peaks and valleys, we have to bring them back. We have to bring back those ridges. We have to bring back that challenge. And if we don't, what's going to happen is we're going to wind down. And when we wind down, guess what happens? Time becomes so slow that we don't even notice it anymore, and we're dead. And look, I'm mixing biological with metaphorical intelligence.
Yeah, I get it.
And the idea is to make it simpler for people to understand. Big things like 13.8 billion years don't make sense to me. I don't need to worry about them.
They don't
It
make
ain't
sense
going
to
to change
anyone.
how I save the choking baby, or how I pay more attention when I'm driving so I don't ram into the car that's in front of me. Gift the time and distance, right? So gift the time and distance, Brian. The reason I talk about that so much is it's a thing that we can control in our day-to-day lives that'll lessen our anxiety and has the opportunity to make us more successful and avoid danger. Why wouldn't we want to avail ourselves of that? Why are we fighting so hard with AI and VR to get people to listen to how important and impactful it can be in a machine where we can control time? Because we can't in our lives. you know? So we'll get there. It's a lot more fighting, I feel. I feel there's going to be some more fist fights and knife fights on that road. But sooner or later, I mean, they have to come around to our way of thinking because it's science. And look, we're not expert scientists. We're talking about things at the street level that influence you every day that you can control. And that makes it powerful.
I think everyone, listening now is realizing, wow, they weren't kidding when they said they have a no drug testing policy at Arcadia Cognorani.
Well, Brian, between that and the AIDS, we got a lot on our plate. You know what I'm saying? So,
not HIV, but
HIV positive, not HIV negative.
That wasn't the Matthew McConaughey reference I was going for. But
well, you hit it right between the headlights. I'm just telling you. Dallas Buyers Club, everybody, rent the film.
So, all right, we covered a lot of topics about time, perception of time, and time distance. So we gave a lot of examples of the so what and how you can do it, and the big takeaways is we have much more control over the perception of it and how we interact with time than we realize. And just understanding that, I think is a powerful concept. And there's a lot you can go to. I mean, there's so much more, especially when it comes to time, perception, memory, recall, everything you can get into. We could have gone 100 different directions with this. I didn't know where we were going to go with it. Other than
I still don't know where we went with it.
I don't know. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where we had. I don't know where we ended up. I remember where we started with Kairos and Kronos and quantitative and qualitative time and what that means. But it is something I did want to discuss because we haven't done it. We haven't explicitly had a podcast about time and our perception of it. Now it comes up in everything that we do because it's a major element. But if we have any questions, folks, the Human Behavior Podcast at gmail.com. We also have our Patreon site. You can go and check out there. We answer everyone's questions on there and have a lot more information. But reach out to us, call bullshit on us, whatever you want to do. Be more than happy to answer any questions. Greg, any other parting words here?
Yeah, keep the call bullshit on us to yourself. I only want good information and happiness. I don't want any of that. When I'm smoking opium, the last thing I need is a Debbie Downer. So please don't be that. On the porch with my rocking chair.
Oh my God. All right. I think that's enough for today. Thanks everyone so much for tuning in. Please share the episode with your friends if you enjoyed it. And don't forget that training changes behavior.